So welcome to the last session of this sustainable and future-proof tech track of Mindtrek. We are going to be focusing on the data responsibility and AI ethics today, and have some concrete tools as promised for the other session as well, and then some experiences and from both from the business side and public sector through the discussion. I welcome Mikko Eloholma from TIEKE, who will be sharing the work we've done in TIEKE around data responsibility.
So, welcome. Nice to see you all here. My topic today is towards data responsibility, how to put ideas into action. And the program of this whole day has been really interesting. I think we've covered a lot of topics, which also are linked to my speech today. So, of course, data responsibility doesn't happen in a vacuum outside of legislation. Legislation and compliance with legislation is the first step towards data responsibility, but data responsibility can be something else too, something we build from complying with legislation going forward. And just briefly, well, you've seen these 4 areas today several times, so I won't go into them in much detail, but these are TIEKE's 4 focus areas in our strategy. And as you might notice, data responsibility could be linked to all of them. Of course, it's part of data economy, how to make an environment for private and public organizations to how to build trust so that also data can be utilized in data economy. Of course, it's part of digital sustainability. That's quite self-evident. Then also, data responsibility is about digital competencies. That's why I am here today, to increase and enhance digital competencies, the awareness about data responsibility. And digital finance management, of course, like Antti said previously, it's all about data, so data responsibility is linked to that as well. So, a little bit about my and TIEKE's background. Why am I talking about data responsibility here today? So, when we were forming our strategy, we thought that sustainability is something that's really like in the core of future digital and information society. And at that point, we decided that someone should take part in Open Data Institute's Data Ethics Facilitator training. And that training I participated and finalized the training in 2022. And in that training I learned, and TIEKE learned, the core frameworks that we use in our data responsibility training as well. And our first training happened this spring, and we had 5 participants from public and private organizations, so 5 organizations. And it was really interesting to learn about the different angles to this quite large and sometimes even too vague theme, and make it more concrete for us as well. The second training is ongoing, and this time we have 9 organizations participating in the training. So, and we are actually today we opened the registration for the 3rd training. So it's open. If you're interested, please contact us, and we will also have these trainings next year. So this is an important theme for us, and we are working make it even more better in the future. Today, I'm first going to tell you how we define data responsibility, what are the key areas, and also give you some case examples. Often the case examples when we talk about data responsibility are examples of things that go wrong. We can read them from media and newspapers. For example, Cambridge Analytica is one really famous one, but we would also like to hear more of these like positive examples. What kind of positive impact can we make with data, because that's really in the core of data responsibility. Then I looked a little bit into like a structure of an organization, because like I said previously, this is quite abstract theme, like data responsibility. There are like every role in an organization has its own angle to this theme. If we think about data protection expert, management, data engineer, everyone has their own angle to this, and it's quite it's really crucial to understand all of these roles that work with data in an organization if we want to work our way towards data responsibility. And last, I'm going to give you, like the title promises, a little bit of a kind of a checklist or steps that every organization can take towards data responsibility. First, let's just stop for a moment and think about what are we talking about here. So Open Data Institute defines data responsibility like this, or actually data ethics. They talk about data ethics, and these two concepts of course overlap, so these are not separate concepts. And like the definition says, the data ethics, the idea of data ethics is to evaluate principles that and data practices that might adversely impact people and society. And like I said previously, besides thinking about the risks, we want to increase the talk and idea of the digital, the handprint in digital and data responsibility. So how could we make the positive impact, and how could we develop services that really benefit us, that utilize data but don't put anyone at a risk? This visualization kind of tells what we are going for here. So on the left side you can see one threat, and on the right side another one, and the aim is to aim to positive impact, of course. And on the left side the threat is data fearing, and what that means is that the problem in data economy and in society at large is that people are afraid to share their data. And why people are afraid to share their data is, of course, based on this. Well, I mentioned Cambridge Analytica before, and there are other warning examples as well. But this is a problem and a bottleneck of data economy right now, that people don't want to share their data because they don't trust the service providers. And on the other hand, the problem might be that people trust the service providers too much, or maybe they don't care enough about their data. So on the right side you see the data hoarding as another kind of risk in data economy and societies. So what that means is, well, there you can see the picture of an oil field. That's kind of a good metaphor for it, but that means that data is like utilized recklessly and without any thought, just collected without any thought what do we need this data for, how we want to use it. And it doesn't matter what kind of data responsibility or data ethics framework you are looking at, you'll find this concept, really important concept of data minimization. And that's in a core of what we are talking about here today as well. So if you don't know why you are collecting the data, you don't know what are you using it for, you don't know how will utilizing the data benefit your customers, then you probably it's really hard for you to be responsible with your data. So sometimes data responsibility might be just the easy key towards it might be just to collect less data, or become more aware of your data handling processes. This finding was already present today, and it's kind of a motivation for every organization, and it states the problem quite clearly that I described with the slide before. So people don't trust necessarily the service providers, and the share of people that don't trust the service providers can be surprisingly large. So in this survey it was found that 42% of Finnish people were agreed or partly agreed with the statement that lack of trust in service providers prevents them from using digital services. And this is a European, like Europe-wide problem. And at least for me, this was a surprising result, because sometimes I feel that individuals don't care enough of their personal data and how it's handled, but this result shows that people do care, and I think that this share of people will only increase in the future. I mentioned that I participated Open Data Institute's Data Ethics Facilitator training, and this is the main framework that they use when they talk about data ethics, and it's also been in the core of our training. So data ethics can be understood through these four main areas. The first one, the red area in the top of the canvas, is data sources, rights and legislation. Then the orange one is evaluating the purposes, consequences and risks of handling data. The green one, communication and transparency. And the blue one, implementing data responsibility and defining your internal processes. And if you look at any other data ethics framework, I think you will find these principles in that as well. And no framework is like perfect, and no framework does the work for you. So these canvases and frameworks are great for having discussions and defining the problems and finding a shared language. So they serve as a starting point for the development, and they kind of make sure that you don't forget anything important. And I'll go into this canvas in a bit more detail also soon, but every color that I mentioned here is shared to these like four main titles, and if you look at them, I think, and you look at the supporting questions under each title, I think you get an idea of what they really mean. So starting from the data sources, we go through the legislation and of course limitations in data sources as well. And then for example on the green area you can see the title engaging with people that was mentioned today in another speech as well. So for example that one means that we should engage with the customers from the beginning when we are developing these data intensive services, and we should define some kind of service or feedback mechanisms that we don't really develop the service separate from people's desires. I promised you some case examples, and I already mentioned Cambridge Analytica. I think everybody here might have heard the term. So Cambridge Analytica was a name of a company that used data quite recklessly, and I've written there that the problem was lack of privacy and transparency. It really was about that. So transparency is another like key word that we hear in these data ethics frameworks, and for example in this example the lack of privacy meant that the people using Facebook didn't know that their data of their psychological profile was shared with this company and used for political purposes to influence elections. So that's kind of like there are so many levels that went wrong, and that's why it's kind of like a school book example of data ethics gone wrong. And this is not so well known example, but I think really interesting one. And this happened in the public sector, and it happened during COVID, when in Great Britain an public authority called Ofqual developed this kind of algorithm to grade students because the tests couldn't be arranged due to COVID pandemic. So they had a problem. We can't organize the tests, but we have to grade the students. How do we do that? And for them, the answer was an algorithm. And you might think that there's a lot of risks involved, and indeed there was. And right after the students received their grades, there were very wide protests. And I think the signs that you can see on the picture on the right side of the slide tell all about how people and the students reacted to this. And as a result, the Ofqual actually had to cancel this whole grading policy and let the teachers of the students to assign the grades for the students. So that's also a good example of like how algorithms can be seen as unethical, even if they give more accurate results than people. It was well understood that if the Ofqual lets teachers to assign the grades, there might be grade inflation because teachers tend to grade their students more high than they should. And that's why they thought that algorithm could be more accurate. And it might be true. The algorithm might have been more accurate, but still it was perceived as so unjustful that they had to cancel the whole operation and resort to the teachers that they maybe should have done on the first place. So it's not always about results, it's also about fairness and how we perceive things. And this is really important if we talk about the ethics of AI and algorithms. Another example of AI ethics, I think this is good because it's so easy to understand. And of course, the generative AI has been a big theme recently during the past year. And this isn't about generative AI, but I think that if you understand the principle behind this example, it can be the same principle helps you to understand ethics of more complicated AI systems as well. So this AI was developed to tell the difference between a husky and a wolf. And the source data, of course, was pictures of husky dogs and wolves. And the AI was trained so that it knew that, okay, this is a picture of a dog and this is a picture of a wolf. And it developed a pattern and a model to understand, to tell the difference between these two animals. And after it had been trained, it was given new pictures of a husky or a wolf. And this time it, of course, didn't know which animal it is. And the AI started to make these decisions and predictions, and it was soon noticed that it wasn't very well trained. And after all, the reason behind that was that, for example, here you can see a husky classified as a wolf. And the reason for that was that there was snow in the picture. So the model that the AI had developed was that if there's snow in the picture, it's usually a wolf. So the source data was really skewed. And the reason why there was snow in the pictures of the wolves is, of course, that usually pictures of wolves are taken outside in the wilderness. And pictures of dogs, on the other hand, are taken inside homes in a different environment. So if you have skewed source data, you probably have skewed results as well. And this, if we talk about recruitment with AI in companies, for example, you can see the same pattern over there as well. So if you, for example, use the data of people in the organization right now as a source data for good employees, and the employees in that company or organization consist, for example, only of men, then the AI might think that, okay, these are recruited and good employees and they are all men, so let's make a what this leads to, and then you'll have problems. So you have to be very careful with the source data. These have been kind of warning examples and cases that I've talked about, and here's one from the other perspective. So Barclays is a bank working in Great Britain, and they've been working closely with Open Data Institute, and they've developed a process that in the start of every project, the bank fills out the data ethics canvas and has the right people in the roundtable discussion and make checkpoints for each project, and also define the implementation carefully. So this is an example of how well data ethics and responsibility is everyday work, and it has to be implemented to the processes of everyday work. And Barclays has some documentation on their website, and you can find more info from Odie's website as well. I think this is an interesting example of how to implement data ethics in this kind of organization. I mentioned that many kind of roles work with this team, and I've collected some roles here. So if you look at any of these roles or pictures, you might think of some data ethics questions that they face in their everyday work. And you'll know that for data protection expert, the questions might be very different from product and service development. And it's easy to understand that no role alone can guarantee data ethics, but we need cooperation. And I think this is the key finding that we have to understand. Often the data responsibility is handled through the lenses of data protection experts and data protection legislation, and that's really important. But for example, if your product and service development doesn't understand these principles, and they might be hard to understand for them if they are not juridically trained, then there's a problem. So we need common terms and common language. And this is linked to, I've defined here 3 kind of levels of data responsibility. First, we can talk about this thing as a management concept. So we can talk about the strategy, what are our priorities, and how we do our responsibility reporting, for example. But then also we can narrow our focus down to one project or product or service and just think about the ethics in scope of that. And I think it's easy to confuse these 2 levels, and if you start thinking about data responsibility too wide in the level of your whole organization, it might be hard because there's so much data, especially in the bigger organizations, and if you try to do everything at once, it might be impossible actually. So this scope of product, service, or a project might be more easily approachable, and start to learn the right tools and frameworks there, and then widen the scope from there. And of course, the third level is the lenses of a certain employee and based on his or her role. So in our training, for example, it's been evident that data engineers and information architects that work with data, tools that they would need are actually more about documenting the data, and because they handle it every day, and they might be worried that do others in their organization understand the data really and the limitations also. So they, for example, need tools of documenting the data so that other people in their organization know how to use it ethically. Okay, last, I promised you some checkpoints and steps to take towards data responsibility. You saw the data ethics canvas previously, and there are endless amount of different frameworks and checklists, and of course AI ethics has been booming a lot, so that's there isn't lack of these frameworks. That's not the problem. There is also different kind of tools. There in the upper right corner you can actually see the tool that Hanna presented previously, the data protection tool that we developed together with the data protection ombudsman in Finland. So all these tools help, but they don't do the work for you, I think. And what they can do is to help discuss these topics, to find common language, help to define the problems and the challenges, and to make the vague ideas less vague and start moving towards putting these ideas into action. And I think the first step to take when you think about responsibility or ethics is to define the scope. I previously had the 3 levels, so it's really important to define the scope and maybe narrow it down quite a lot. So it might be a risk to think about too much at the same time. It's important to have the responsibility strategy, but if you, that it might be hard as well. So to take small steps is the key here. When the scope has been defined, I think the value proposition is really important. It's important to understand why are we doing this. So what is the potential, like the positive potential, and also what are the risks? And that's the motivation, of course. If there isn't any risk or much of a positive impact, then there might be need for this kind of work either. When like this ethics and responsibility they are not new terms, but maybe with data they are. But it's important to understand that there's nothing new under the sun in a way. If you have made data inventory, if you have thought about GDPR or other legislation, then you have done some responsibility work as well. So there's always a lot that has been done, and it's important to understand what has been done already and start from there. So don't invent the bicycle again in that sense. The 4th step here is to check. I use the word internal transparency. What it means is that you have to understand what is happening right now before developing things to more responsible direction. So do we really understand how we handle data? And here, for example, data inventory is really important. As last 4 steps, I put there the areas of the data ethics canvas that I presented previously. So, but if you don't use data ethics canvas, I think you still go through the same areas. And of course, for example, the first one, data sources, rights and legislation, it's really wide thing. There's a lot of legislation coming as well. But when you have narrowed down the scope enough, then all legislation might not be like as relevant to you in that scope. So that's also why it's so important to narrow the focus a bit, that there isn't too much to take care of at a time. My last slide is it's in Finnish because our data responsibility training is in Finnish, but nevertheless it will happen starting in November this year, and the registration is open. So feel free to contact us if you need more info, and of course welcome to the training, and we are really happy to learn about different kind of organization and develop our training as well as we go. Thank you.